great hall of the Thornridge Palace gleamed with cold marble and colder hearts. Ilara moved through the shadows like a ghost, her bare feet silent against the polished floors, as she carried a heavy tray of crystal goblets toward the raised dais where Alpha King Cale Thornridge sat in brutal magnificence. 3 years she had worked within these walls, 3 years of being invisible, of being nothing more than another nameless Omega servant whose existence barely registered in the eyes of the wolves who ruled this kingdom. She kept her head down, her mousy brown hair falling forward to hide her face, hide the pain that lived permanently in her chest, hide the secret that would destroy her if anyone ever discovered the truth. The lasso de mate, the bond that should have blazed between her and the Alpha King the moment she first stepped into his presence, lay dormant and silent, choked by a curse she did not understand, leaving her hollow and aching and utterly alone. Kyle did not look at her as she refilled his goblet, his obsidian eyes fixed on the beta who was giving a report about border disputes with the northern packs. He was devastating in his beauty and terrifying in his cruelty, all sharp cheekbones and brutal mouth, his black hair falling across his forehead as he listened with the focused intensity of a predator. 5 years ago, his first mate had died under mysterious circumstances, and the grief had transformed him from a stern but fair ruler into something dark and vicious. A king who ruled through fear and intimidation, who showed mercy to no one and trusted even less. Ilara had heard the stories whispered in the servant quarters, how he had loved his mate Seraphina with desperate devotion, how her death had shattered something fundamental in his soul, how he now treated every Omega with particular disdain, as though their very existence offended him. She understood why he hated her kind, even as it broke her heart each day to be so close to her mate, and yet completely invisible to him. The ceremony that evening was meant to celebrate the summer solstice, a tradition that brought together all the high-ranking wolves of the kingdom for a night of political maneuvering disguised as festivity. Ilara worked alongside the other servants, bringing food and drink, clearing plates, enduring the casual cruelty of nobles who saw servants as little more than furniture. Lady Morgana, a beautiful alpha female who had been pursuing Kyle relentlessly since Seraphina's death, snapped her fingers at Ilara and pointed at a spilled drink, her lip curling in disgust when Ilara immediately knelt to clean it. The other nobles laughed, and Ilara felt the familiar burn of humiliation crawl up her neck. But she kept her expression blank, kept her movements efficient, gave them no reaction to feed upon. She had learned long ago that showing emotion only made the abuse worse, that the safest way to survive was to become exactly what they believed her to be: nothing, no one, utterly beneath notice. But then the air in the great hall changed, became thick and electric with a wrongness that made Ilara's skin prickle with warning. She looked up from where she knelt on the floor, just as the massive crystal chandelier above Cale's head began to glow with a sickly green light, magic crackling through the air like lightning. Several wolves shouted warnings, but it was too late. The chandelier exploded in a burst of cursed energy that shot directly toward the Alpha King like a spear of death. Ilara did not think, did not hesitate, did not consider the consequences. Her body moved on pure instinct, driven by something deeper than conscious choice, and she threw herself across the distance between them, her arms spreading wide as she positioned herself between Kyle and the killing curse. The magic slammed into her chest with the force of a physical blow, driving the air from her lungs, filling her veins with acid and ice and agony beyond description. She should have died instantly. The curse was designed to kill an alpha, to stop a heart as powerful as Cale's, and she was just an Omega without even a wolf to protect her. But the moment the dark magic touched her skin, something inside Ilara shattered and blazed to life simultaneously. The curse that had been suppressing her true nature for 3 long years cracked like breaking glass, and suddenly her wolf was there, not weak or absent, but magnificent, and glowing with an inner light that had nothing to do with normal shifter magic. Power erupted from her core, ancient and pure, a healing energy that did not just absorb the killing curse, but transformed it, purified it, sent it scattering into harmless sparks of light that faded into nothing. And in that same instant, the mate bond that had been locked away exploded between her and Cale with such force that they both cried out, the golden thread snapping into place and binding them together so completely that she could feel his shock, his confusion, his sudden overwhelming recognition slamming into her own desperate love and years of hidden longing. Alara collapsed to the marble floor, her body shaking violently from the magical backlash, barely conscious as chaos erupted around her. She heard Cale roaring orders, felt his hands on her shoulders as he turned her over, and then his face was above hers, those obsidian eyes wide with something that looked almost like horror. The mate bond sang between them, impossible to deny or ignore, and she watched realization crash over him in waves. She saw the moment he understood what she was to him, saw the moment he remembered 3 years of treating her like garbage, like she was invisible, like she mattered less than nothing. His hands were shaking as he pulled her against his chest, and she could feel his wolf howling inside him, enraged and devastated that their mate had been right there, suffering right under their nose, and they had never even looked at her properly. Before you continue with this incredible story, if you're enjoying this tale of hidden bonds and redemption, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more supernatural romance stories that will capture your heart. Your support means everything and helps us bring you more content like this. Now let's see what happens when an alpha king realizes he's been blind to his true mate for 3 long years. The palace healers rushed Alara to the medical wing, but it quickly became clear that normal healing magic had no effect on whatever had happened to her. Her body temperature kept fluctuating wildly, her wolf surfacing and retreating in erratic waves, and the mate bond continued to pulse with such intensity that Cale could barely think straight. He refused to leave her side, sitting in a chair next to her bed with his head in his hands, his carefully constructed walls crumbling as he was forced to confront the magnitude of his cruelty. Marcus, his beta and oldest friend, stood near the door with his arms crossed, his expression carefully neutral, even though Cale could sense his judgment. They had known each other since childhood, and Marcus had never been afraid to tell him uncomfortable truths, but even he seemed uncertain how to address what had been revealed tonight. When Alara finally woke, her eyes fluttering open to find Cale watching her with an intensity that made her want to hide, she tried to pull away from the bond, tried to retreat into the protective numbness that had kept her sane for 3 years, but the connection between them was too strong now, too raw and new, and she could feel everything he felt, the horror and guilt, and desperate need to fix what he had broken. He reached for her hand, and she flinched, actually flinched away from her own mate, and the pain that crossed his face was so genuine that it almost made her feel guilty for her very reasonable reaction. His voice when he spoke was rough, barely more than a whisper, and she realized with shock that the terrifying Alpha King was actually afraid of her rejection, afraid that he had destroyed any chance they might have had before he even knew she existed. Cale told her he did not understand, asked her why she had never said anything, why she had hidden the bond, and Alara felt a bitter laugh escape her throat. She explained in a voice made hoarse from screaming during the magical attack that she had not hidden anything, that from the moment she first entered the palace 3 years ago, she had felt nothing, no bond, no recognition, just an empty ache where the connection should have been. She told him about the curse that had been suppressing her wolf, about the years of wondering if she was broken or defective, about the special agony of working in the same building as her mate and being treated like she was invisible. She watched his face grow paler with each revelation, watched him realize that his mate had been suffering alone while he had been too wrapped up in his own grief and rage to notice anyone's pain but his own. The investigation into the attack revealed disturbing truths that shook the foundation of everything Cale thought he knew about his past. The curse that had nearly killed him was linked to the same dark magic that had been suppressing Alara's true nature, and both spells bore the signature of someone he had trusted completely, Seraphina, his first mate, the woman he had mourned for 5 years, had not been what she claimed. She had been a witch, a powerful one, who had infiltrated his pack with a specific purpose. The royal archives, Once they were examined with fresh eyes and the help of Alara's newly awakened magical senses, revealed that Seraphina had been slowly poisoning him. Not enough to kill, but enough to change him, to make him cruel and paranoid, to transform him into the kind of king who would destroy his own kingdom from within. Alara's true identity came to light during the same investigation, and it was almost as shocking as the revelations about Seraphina. She was not a nobody, not a worthless Omega without a pack. She was Princess Alara Moonwhisper, the lost heir of the Lumina Kingdom, a realm of magical wolves that had been destroyed 18 years ago when she was just an infant. Her parents had been healers, wolves blessed with the rare ability to purify dark magic and cure curses, and they had been specifically targeted and eliminated by a coalition of dark witches who feared their power. A loyal guardian had smuggled baby Alara out during the massacre, had used powerful concealment magic to hide her true nature, and had placed her in the Thornridge Kingdom, with the hope that one day she would be in a position to stop the darkness that had destroyed her birth family. The curse suppressing Alara's wolf had been a protection as much as a prison, keeping her hidden from the same enemies who had killed her parents. But it had also ensured that when the time came, when Kale's life was threatened by the same dark magic, she would be there to save him. The mate bond between them was not coincidence, but destiny. A convergence of bloodlines meant to bring together the strength of an alpha king with the healing power of the Lumina line. Together, they had the potential to not just rule, but to transform the kingdom, to undo the damage that Seraphina's poison had inflicted, to restore the Thornridge wolves to what they had been before grief and dark magic had corrupted their leader. But knowing the grand destiny did not make the personal wounds any less painful. Alara struggled to reconcile the mate bond pulling her toward Kale with the memories of 3 years of degradation, of being treated like she was worthless, of crying herself to sleep in the servants' quarters while her mate lived in luxury above her. She knew intellectually that he had not known, that he had been as much a victim of Seraphina's manipulation as anyone, but her heart still ached with the accumulated hurts of 1,000 small cruelties. And Kale, for all his power and authority, found himself completely helpless in the face of her pain, unable to command or intimidate or force his way to forgiveness, forced instead to actually earn back the trust he had unknowingly destroyed. The court was in an uproar over the revelation that their king's true mate was a former servant, an Omega who many of them had personally mistreated. Lady Morgana led the faction arguing that Alara was unsuitable to be Luna Queen, that her years of servitude had made her too weak, too broken to lead. Others whispered that the whole thing was a trick, that Alara had somehow manufactured the mate bond to elevate her position, despite the fact that such magic was literally impossible. The nobles who had treated her worst were the loudest in their objections, and Alara understood that their resistance was born from fear that she would seek revenge for their cruelty, fear that their own ugly natures would be exposed if someone who had been on the receiving end of their abuse now held power over them. Kale addressed the court with a cold fury that reminded everyone why he was Alpha King, making it absolutely clear that anyone who spoke against his mate would be considered an enemy of the crown. But Alara stopped him before he could make threats that would only breed resentment, stepping forward to address the assembled. Wolves herself. She spoke with a quiet dignity that commanded attention far more effectively than shouting, telling them that she had no interest in revenge, that she had seen enough cruelty in her life and had no desire to perpetuate it. She acknowledged that she had much to learn about leadership, about politics, about being Luna Queen, but reminded them that she had also learned resilience, compassion, and the true cost of power wielded without mercy during her years of invisibility. Her speech did not win over everyone, but it planted seeds of doubt in the minds of those who had dismissed her as weak or incompetent. Here was an Omega who had endured years of abuse without breaking, who had thrown herself in front of a killing curse without hesitation, who had magical healing abilities that could benefit the entire kingdom. Perhaps, some of them began to think, there was more to strength than brute force and dominance. Perhaps the Thornridge Kingdom needed exactly the kind of leader who understood what it meant to suffer, who could not ignore the pain of the weakest members of their society because she had lived that pain herself. Kale's attempts at courting Alara were awkward and earnest, in a way that would have been endearing if they were not so weighted with history. He brought her gifts that showed he had actually been paying attention to her preferences, books about healing magic and herb gardens, soft blankets in the colors she favored, small things that proved. He saw her now even if he had been blind before. He asked her about her life, really asked and really listened, and seemed devastated by each new detail about how hard her existence had been while he lived in ignorance mere floors above her. He wanted to give her everything immediately, to dress her in silks and jewels, to move her into the Luna Queen's suite, but Alara refused, insisting that she needed time, needed space to figure out who she was now that she was no longer hiding. The mate. Bond complicated everything, made it hard to think clearly when Kale was near, filled her with a longing that had nothing to do with logic or self-preservation. Her wolf, newly awakened and powerful, wanted to claim their mate immediately, wanted to forget the past and embrace the future they could have together. But Alara's human heart was more cautious, more wounded, and she found herself caught between the biological imperative of the bond and her own very reasonable hesitation to trust someone who had hurt her so deeply. Even if that hurt had been unintentional, she made Kale promise that they would take things slowly, that he would court her properly as though they had just met, that he would prove through actions, not words, that he had truly changed from the cruel king she had served in silent misery. The healing process for both of them was not linear or easy. There were days when Kale would slip back into his old authoritarian habits, issuing commands instead of requests, expecting immediate obedience because that was what he had always received, and Alara would shut down completely, retreating into the defensive numbness that had protected her during her years as a servant. He was learning that being a good mate required a different kind of strength than being an alpha king, required vulnerability and patience, and the willingness to be wrong. She was learning that holding on to pain was easier than risking being hurt again, but that true healing required eventually choosing to trust despite the fear. Marcus became an unexpected ally for both of them, serving as a mediator when their conversations became too fraught, offering Kale blunt advice about respecting Alara's boundaries, reminding Alara that people could change if they were willing to do the hard work. He had watched Kale's descent into cruelty after Seraphina's death, had seen his friend become someone he barely recognized, and he was cautiously hopeful that Alara's presence might bring back the honorable wolf Kale had been before dark magic and manipulation had poisoned him. He also made sure that Alara had her own support system, introducing her to other wolves in the court who were kind and trustworthy, making sure she was never isolated or dependent solely on Kale for companionship or guidance. Alara's healing abilities became increasingly important as she began to understand the full scope of what Seraphina's magic had done to the kingdom. The Dark Witch had not just poisoned Kale, but had woven curses throughout the palace itself. Subtle spells that increased aggression, decreased empathy, turned minor disagreements into violent conflicts. The entire court had been living under the influence of corrupted magic for 5 years, and it had transformed the culture of the Thornridge Wolves from one of honor and loyalty to one of fear and brutality. With her newly awakened powers, Alara could sense these curses like infected wounds in the fabric of reality, and, slowly, methodically, she began the work of cleansing them, one spell at a time. The change in the palace atmosphere was gradual, but undeniable. As Alara purified the dark magic, wolves who had been cruel and aggressive began to remember who they had been before, began to question behaviors they had accepted as normal. Arguments that would have ended in bloodshed were resolved with words instead. Omegas who had been cowering in fear began to stand straighter, to speak up, to demand basics. Respect. The transformation was not complete or universal. There were still plenty of wolves who were simply cruel by nature rather than by magical influence. But there was a shift happening, a slow turn toward something better. Kale watched Alara work with a mixture of awe and growing love that had nothing to do with the mate bond, and everything to do with witnessing who she truly was. She was patient with wolves who had tormented her, explaining what she was doing and why, rather than simply imposing her will. She was thoughtful in her approach to healing, understanding that removing dark magic sometimes meant confronting painful truths about choices people had made while under its influence. She was incredibly powerful, far more so than anyone had initially realized. But she wielded that power with a gentleness that made people feel safe, rather than afraid. This, he began to understand, was what true leadership looked like. Not domination, but service. Not inspiring fear, but earning trust. Drop a comment below telling us what you think Kale needs to do to truly earn Alara's forgiveness, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss our stories of supernatural romance and second chances. The first real test of their fragile new dynamic came when a delegation from the Northern Pack arrived with serious accusations. They claimed that Thornridge wolves had been conducting raids on their territory, stealing resources and attacking their people, and they demanded justice. Kale's instinct was to meet force with force, to deny the accusations and prepare for war. The same aggressive posture he had maintained for years. But Alara asked him to wait, to actually investigate before making threats. And though it clearly cost him to hold back, he agreed. What they discovered was damning. A group of Thornridge warriors had indeed been conducting unauthorized raids, but they had been doing so under the lingering influence of Seraphina's aggression curses, following old orders from when Kale had been at his most paranoid and violent. Kale wanted to execute the guilty wolves as an example, to show strength and decisiveness. But Alara convinced him that there was another way. Together, they met with the Northern Pack delegation, and Kale did something he had not done in 5 years. He apologized. He took full responsibility for the actions of his wolves, acknowledged that his leadership had been compromised by dark magic, and offered genuine reparations rather than excuses. Alara then used her healing abilities to cleanse the aggression curses from the guilty warriors in front of the Northern Pack witnesses, showing them the magical influence that had been driving the violence. The transformation in the raiders was immediate and visible, their expressions clearing as though waking from a nightmare, their horror at their own actions under the curse's influence absolutely genuine. The Northern Pack Alpha was skeptical at first, unwilling to accept that magic could be an excuse for violence. But Alara did not argue or make demands. Instead, she offered to come to their territory, to check their own lands for similar curses, to share her healing abilities freely with no expectation of political gain. It was such an unprecedented offer, so contrary to the usual games of power and dominance between packs, that it shocked everyone present. Kyle supported her offer despite his clear discomfort at the idea of his mate, traveling to potentially hostile territory. And that show of trust, that willingness to be vulnerable, did more to ease tensions than any threat or show of force could have achieved. The trip to the Northern Pack territory revealed that Seraphina's corruption had spread far beyond the Thornridge Kingdom. Alara found traces of the same dark magic in 3 other packs, subtle curses designed to increase conflict and weaken the alliances that had once kept their region stable and peaceful. It became clear that the witch's plan had been far more ambitious than just destroying one kingdom. She had been working to plunge the entire network of packs into chaos, to weaken them so completely that they would be vulnerable to conquest by the dark forces that had destroyed the Lumina Kingdom years before. Alara was not just Kale's mate, or even just the Luna Queen of Thornridge. She was potentially the only thing standing between all the wolf packs and the same destruction that had claimed her. Birth family. The revelation changed everything about how the other packs viewed Alara, and by extension, Kale. She went from being seen as a suspicious nobody to a potential savior, and requests for her healing abilities began pouring in from territories across the region. Kyle struggled with the idea of sharing his mate with the world, every protective instinct screaming at him to keep her close and safe. But Alara reminded him gently that her power was not meant to be hoarded or hidden. She had been given these abilities for a reason, and refusing to use them to help others would make her just as selfish as the nobles who had looked down on her when she was a servant. It was a lesson in leadership that Kale was still learning. That true strength sometimes meant letting go, meant trusting your people to be strong, even when you were not there to protect them. They developed a system where Alara would travel to other territories with a full security detail, and Marcus as her primary guardian when Kyle could not accompany her himself, which was often given his responsibilities as king. It was torture for Kyle, being separated from his mate when their bond was still so new and fragile. but he endured it because she asked him to, because he was learning that loving someone meant supporting their choices, even when those choices terrified you. And Alara, despite her initial hesitation to trust him, found herself falling in love with this version of Kael, the one who listened. Instead of commanded, who asked for her input on kingdom matters, who visibly struggled with his controlling instincts, but chose to respect her autonomy anyway. Their relationship deepened in the quiet moments between crises, in late-night conversations where they shared their fears and hopes, in the gentle touches that gradually became less tentative as Alara's wounds slowly healed. Kyle told her about the king he had been before Seraphina, about the ideals he had held and lost, about the shame he felt when he remembered some of the things he had done while under the influence of dark magic and his own unchecked grief. Alara shared her memories of her years in hiding, the loneliness of growing up without a pack, the strange dreams she had always had about a family she could not remember, the way she had almost given up hope that her mate would ever see her as anything more than a servant. The mate bond continued to strengthen between them, but now it was overlaid with genuine affection and hard-won trust, rather than just biological imperative. When they finally completed the mating bond fully, it was a choice they both made consciously and together. Not a surrender to instinct, but a commitment to build something real. The magical surge that accompanied their union was so powerful that it lit up the palace like a beacon, and Alara's healing abilities merged with Kael's alpha strength in a way that created something entirely new. A combined power that could not just cleanse dark magic, but actually transform it into protective wards and blessings. Lady Morgana made one final attempt to undermine Alara's position, spreading rumors that the former servant was manipulating the king with magic, that she was no better than Seraphina had been. But the accusation fell flat because everyone had seen the change in Kael, had witnessed how Alara challenged him rather than controlling him, how she made him better rather than worse. When Morgana tried to force a formal challenge for the position of Luna Queen, citing old pack laws that allowed such contests, Alara accepted calmly and without fear. The challenge was supposed to be a physical fight, a test of dominance that Morgana was certain she would win against an Omega, but Alara proposed a different kind of contest instead. She suggested that they each spend 1 week serving the lowest-ranking members of the pack, working alongside the servants and Omegas, tending to their needs, listening to their concerns. Whoever earned more genuine respect and loyalty from those they served would be declared the winner. It was such an unusual proposal that the council had no precedent for how to judge it, but Kael supported Alara's suggestion, seeing the wisdom in a test that measured leadership qualities rather than just fighting ability. Morgana was trapped by her own challenge and forced to agree, confident that her alpha strength and noble bearing would win over the servants easily. The week that followed was illuminating for everyone who witnessed it. Morgana approached the challenge with barely concealed disdain, performing the required tasks with visible disgust, treating the servants with condescension, even as she tried to win their favor with promises of rewards and privileges if they supported her claim. Alara simply returned to the work she had done for 3 years, but now she did it with her head held high, with her true identity known, with her power visible for all to see. She listened to the servants' concerns about unfair working conditions, about nobles who abused their positions, about the lack of respect for essential workers. She did not make grand promises, but instead implemented small, immediate changes, using her influence as Luna Queen to address grievances that had been ignored for years. By the end of the week, the result was obvious to everyone. The servants and Omegas looked at Alara with genuine love and loyalty, seeing her as one of their own who had risen to power, without forgetting where she came from. They looked at Morgana with thinly veiled contempt, seeing through her performance to the disdain underneath. When the council declared Alara the uncontested Luna Queen, even Morgana's own supporters had to acknowledge that the judgment was fair. The challenge had revealed something important about what the kingdom needed. Not another powerful alpha who ruled through dominance, but a leader who understood that true strength came from uplifting others, rather than standing on top of them. The final confrontation with the dark forces that had destroyed the Lumina kingdom came sooner than anyone expected. The same coalition of witches who had killed Alara's parents launched a coordinated attack on multiple pack territories, seeking to finish what they had started 18 years ago. They had been waiting for Alara to reveal herself, knowing that the Lumina bloodline represented the greatest threat to their plans for conquest. The battles were fierce and costly, with losses on all sides, but the packs fought together in a way they had not managed in decades, united by the alliances Alara had built during her healing missions. Alara stood at the center of the final battle, her power blazing like the sun as she cleansed the dark magic that the witches hurled at the assembled wolves. Kyle fought at her side, his alpha strength amplified by their completed mate bond, protecting her while she worked her healing magic. They moved together, like they had been fighting side by side for years, rather than months, perfectly synchronized, each trusting the other completely to guard their back. When the leader of the witch coalition tried one last desperate curse, aimed directly at Alara's heart, Kale threw himself in front of her just as she had once thrown herself in front of him, coming full circle in their journey of love and sacrifice. But this time, Alara was not powerless or suppressed. This time she had full access to her healing abilities, and she caught the curse before it could strike Kale, transforming the death magic into pure light that she turned back on the witches who had created it. The purified energy did not kill them, but instead broke the dark spells they had woven around their own souls, forcing them to confront the full weight of what they had done, the lives they had destroyed, the suffering they had caused. Some of them fled, unable to bear the truth of their own cruelty, but others fell to their knees. In genuine remorse, the darkness that had driven them for so long finally lifted. The aftermath of the battle left the supernatural world fundamentally changed. The Dark Coalition was broken, the curses that had been poisoning the packs were cleansed, and Alara's role as a healer became formalized in a way that transcended any single kingdom. She became known as the Lightbringer, the bridge between packs, the living embodiment of the Lumina Kingdom's legacy. But more importantly to her, she had found her place in the world, had discovered that her worth was not determined by whether others saw her, but by what she chose to do with her power and her pain. Kale transformed as well, becoming the kind of king he had always been meant to be, before grief and dark magic had corrupted him. He ruled with strength, but also with compassion, with confidence, but also with humility, always checking his decisions against the question of whether they served the strongest or protected the weakest. He credited Alara publicly and often for his transformation, never letting anyone forget that his Luna Queen had saved not just his life, but his very soul, that she had seen worth in him even when he had been at his worst, and had patiently, stubbornly, refused to let him remain the monster he had become. Their love story became legend, whispered about in packs across the region, the tale of the invisible servant who had been a hidden princess all along, the cruel king who had been redeemed by the mate he had overlooked, the healing power of genuine love and second chances. But to Alara and Kale, it was simply their life, their daily choice to be better than they had been, to build something beautiful out of the broken pieces they had both carried for too long. If this story touched your heart, please show your support by liking this video and sharing it with others who love tales of redemption and supernatural romance. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that prove love can heal, even the deepest wounds, and that everyone deserves a second chance to be seen and valued for who they truly are. Years passed, and the Thornridge Kingdom flourished under their joint leadership. Alara established a school for young wolves with healing abilities, ensuring that the Lumina legacy would continue and that others with similar gifts would not have to hide their true nature, as she had been forced to do. Kale worked with the other pack alphas to create new laws protecting Omegas and servants, making sure that no one else would suffer the casual cruelty that had once been considered normal. Together, they had 3 children, each inheriting different aspects of their parents' abilities, the perfect blend of strength and compassion that would lead the kingdom into a brighter future. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the demands of leadership had been set aside for a few precious hours, Alara and Kyle would sit together in the garden she had planted on the palace grounds, surrounded by healing herbs and flowers that bloomed year-round under her magical care. He would pull her close, burying his face in her hair, and whisper the same words he had spoken every day since she agreed to be his mate, telling her that he saw her, that he valued her, that he would spend the rest of his life making sure she never felt invisible again, and she would turn in his arms, would touch his face with gentle hands, and remind him that redemption was not a destination, but a journey, that becoming worthy of love required choosing compassion over cruelty every single day, and that she was proud to walk that path with him. The servant girl who had been invisible had become a queen who could not be ignored, and the cruel king had become a leader worthy of the loyalty he commanded. Together they proved that the greatest love stories are not about perfect people finding each other, but about broken people choosing to heal together, about seeing worth in those the world overlooks, about the transformative power of genuine compassion to save not just a single soul, but an entire kingdom. Their story became a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever felt worthless or unseen, a reminder that true value comes from within, that destiny cannot be suppressed forever, and that love, when it is real and earned, can indeed save even the most lost of souls.